Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Plugged into History. Thanks for joining Middleton Place Foundation for our digital programming this morning. Today is Let's Talk Tuesday, and we are going to take our first looks at the American Revolution this week. And so, of course, what better subject to begin with than Arthur Middleton himself, signer of the Declaration of Independence. So we're grateful to have you here and to be able to learn a little bit about Arthur as a man and as a politician. And really, I don't need to give him any introduction. I'm going to let him take it away and introduce himself. So thanks for being here.
Well, good morning to you all. My name is Arthur Middleton, and it is a pleasure to be here with this morning here at Middleton Place. Matter of fact, we're actually coming from what is known now as the Middleton Place House Museum. But during my time, well, this was simply just one of the three buildings which I call my home. Matter of fact, if we look at this sketch done by a Middleton descendant in the mid-19th century, we see the main house here, okay, built about 1705, and then in 1755, my father built both a northern flanker and a southern flanker. Now, all three of these buildings were destroyed during the Civil War in 1865. However, the south flanker received the less damage, and it was restored, and this stayed as a Middleton residence until 1975. And today, well, I have been asked to come back and give you not only a sampling of my life, but also to give you a brief tour of this house museum as well. You know, as I look back upon my life, well, there are several things that stand out to me, and probably the thing that is most dear to me, besides my family and my children, was my education. You see, I was born in 1742, and though I was slightly educated here in South Carolina, my father, Henry Middleton, well, he decided I needed a more formal training. So at the age of 12, he sent me to London with my Uncle William, and from there, I attended the finest schools. I attended Harrow and Westminster. 3 years later, in 1757, I was admitted to the Middle Temple in London, where I began my studies in law. However, it was 4 years later when I was able to attend Trinity Hall at Cambridge, and oh, I tell you, those perhaps were the happiest times of my life. As a student, well, I delved into my books. Matter of fact, I became considered not only a scholar in Latin, but also in the ancient antiquities of Rome. And perhaps to best express this to you, I point to this portrait of me done when I was around the age of 21, at Cambridge, I should add. And if you look at that, well, first of all, I was a handsome man, was I not? The years have not been maybe as kind, but that matters not. But as we look at this picture, well, you can see my upbringing, because not only was I educated in book learning, but also in the fine etiquettes of life, of refinement, taste for arts and culture and etiquette. And also, my love for the antiquities is shown by this Roman-type robe that I'm wearing here across my breast, and the Van Dyke collar around my neck. Now, as I said, this portrait was done around 1763, and it was not too shortly after this that I decided to return to South Carolina. And upon my return, well, I had discovered that I was the master of Middleton Place. You see, 2 years prior, my darling mother, Mary, well, she had passed away, but according to the dictates of both her will and her dowry, Middleton Place was to go to her oldest son, which was I. So I not only left London as a member of the gentry, I came here to South Carolina and became a landed gentry. Matter of fact, within 8 months of my arrival, well, I married the girl next door. Her name was Mary Izzard, and she lived on a plantation in Cedar Grove just across from Middleton Place, across the Ashley River. And within 5 years, by 1768, 5 years of returning to South Carolina, well, not only had I inherited my wealth, inherited Middleton Place, found a wife, well, I had also resumed my duties in public service, as far as being elected as a justice of the peace and elected to the House of Commons. And in addition to that, within those 5 years, I had attained not only Middleton Place, but I also had acquired 4 other plantations in South Carolina. So I am proud to say that by the age of 26, I had already accomplished what most men take a lifetime to do. I was prosperous, I was wealthy, I had a loving family. And I decided at that moment I was going to go back to Europe. Now, why, you ask? Why would a man who has everything here in South Carolina return to Europe? Well, let me say there are several reasons. One, I had acquired the wealth and the means to be able to do so. Secondly, I was returning to the site of where I was brought up, to where I became a gentleman, to where I was formed and shaped as a man. And most importantly, I had the opportunity not only to revisit this, but to share this with the woman of my dreams. While my wife and I toured Europe, in those 3 years that we were gone, well, our first son was born. And around 1770, this portrait here was done of myself, my wife, Mary, and what we often lovingly refer to as perhaps the world's biggest baby, our first son, Henry. Matter of fact, Henry will be the first child of the 9 children that we have. But of those 9 children, 8 of them actually lived to be adults. And again, looking at this portrait, you can see not only the status here, the Roman robes, which not only I wear, but my wife and child wear as well. But I think the most important thing I see in this picture are the smiles. We have the beginning of a union here, a beginning of a family. And I tell you, at that time, I was perhaps the happiest man alive. After this excursion through Europe, I had to return to South Carolina for business reasons. But when I came back to South Carolina, I discovered it was not the same. I discovered a colony, or a country, my country of South Carolina, in the throes of revolution. There was talk everywhere about independence and about patriotism. And as I tell you, I threw myself into this. I became enamored with this idea of becoming an independent nation, or more shall I say, of supporting the patriot cause here. So while I was in South Carolina, well, I was elected to both the 1st and the 2nd provincial congresses. I continued to serve in the House of Assembly. In addition to that, I was also appointed to the Council of Safety, the Committee of Correspondence, or Intelligence as some had called it, and also a secret committee that was used to help bolster the defenses of South Carolina, along with William Henry Drayton, Charles Copeland Pinckney, who was my brother-in-law at the time. We helped to arrange, shall we say, a little excursion to some of the local magazines in order to acquire gunpowder and other ammunitions to be able to support our cause. It was also during this time that, well, my love of the classics, my teaching and education, gave me a purpose in life. And what I mean by that is that it made me very committed, very directed. Matter of fact, some people say I became somewhat of a radical in the revolution. For example, when 2 gentlemen in Charlestown were caught bad-mouthing the cause of the revolution, also raising toast to the king, well, I was very proud to say that these 2 gentlemen, they were given a new set of clothes.
What does that mean, sir?
Well, what it means is they were basically given, they were decorated in tars and feather. And not only were they decorated in this, they were paraded around the town and stopped at several places where they drank a toast to the new colonies. In addition to that, any time that I heard that someone did not support the patriot cause, well, I petitioned in the provincial congress to have their property confiscated. You see, in my mind's eye at that time, the ends justified the means. You were either with us or against us. That. Now, let's continue to walk through this house and we'll learn more about the revolution, especially 1776, where some great changes occur here in South Carolina. In the spring of that year, I was actually appointed to a committee of 11 to to write a new constitution for South Carolina. Also, in addition to that, well, along with William Henry Drayton, we were appointed to design a new state seal for South Carolina.
In fact, a few moments ago, one of our viewers said, "Hello, Arthur. Fine job on the state seal, sir."
Why, I thank you very much for that. It contains one of my favorite quotes, of course, in Latin, Dum spero spiro, which means, while I breathe, I hope. A very fitting epitaph, or shall we say saying, for the Revolution, and for these times as well. Come, let us learn more about that summer of 1776 as we climb the stairs here to the second floor of the house.
We have a comment that your wife was lovely, sir. You are a lucky man.
Oh, I am I not? Very much so. Matter of fact, my wife was often described as one of the fairest of her sex while she was in Philadelphia, matter of fact. Here it is. The Declaration of Independence. In 1776, matter of fact, in the spring, I was chosen to replace my father in the Continental Congress. And one of the first actions I took there, well, I was present there on June 1st, when the Virginia statesman Henry Lee stood up and proposed his resolution that these colonies should be free and independent states. Well, I tell you, when he spoke those words, you could hear a pin drop in the room. Because until that moment, the word independence, it had never been spoken. It was the elephant in the room, shall we say. But here it was, out in the open. Oh, and what a commotion it caused. For the remainder of that day, and well into that night, we argued over this resolution of independence. For every person that was for it, there was one against it. And perhaps the leading opponents of independence, well, were the colonies of Pennsylvania and South Carolina. Oh. Now, I see some of you are shocked to hear that, but please, let me state my case before you judge us South Carolinians too harshly. You see, it was not that we were against independence. No, far from it. We believed that the colonies should be independent. They should rule themselves. However, this was not the time. Many of us, myself included, not only had friends, but we had families in the old country. And we knew that if independence was declared, any hope of reconciliation with Great Britain would be gone. And then, well, there were other matters. If we declared our independence, what then? What do we do then? How will we govern ourselves? Will some part of the colonies, like New England, for example, will they try to rule over us? Will a foreign power, such as Spain or France, come in and try to invade and take us over? And furthermore, contrary to your history books, we early colonists, well, we weren't as friendly as you often portray us. Matter of fact, some of us did not like one another very much. And how, for heaven's name, if we could not get along with ourselves, how were we going to unite and take on the greatest empire in the world? These are the questions that vexed us. And it came very evident that we were not going to solve this question that night. So it was decided that the issue would be tabled till July 1st. But in the meantime, a committee was selected to write a Declaration of Independence. On June 28th, Thomas Jefferson, Robert Livingston, Roger Sherman, John Adams, and Benjamin Franklin presented the Declaration of Independence to Congress, where it was read aloud, and then it was put away. We forgot all about it. Now, this may seem strange to you, but before we could decide on the Declaration, we first had to take care of the resolution. On July 1st, the first vote for independence was taken. 9 colonies said yes. South Carolina and Pennsylvania voted no. The colony of Delaware, well, with only 2 delegates present, they were opposing one another. And the colony of New York, well, it abstained from voting because it said that its legislature had not given them enough power to do so. So there you have it. 9 colonies voted yes for independence. But we all knew in our heart of hearts, for this to work, for this to have any integrity, it had to be unanimous. So a second vote was called for the following day. And there on July 2nd, all the colonies, except for New York, who continued to abstain, voted yes for independence. Now the change in Delaware's vote, well, it was perhaps due to the arrival of a Mr. Caesar Rodney, who came in that morning, a third delegate, and broke the tie. For Pennsylvania, well, their vote to the affirmative perhaps can be attributed to the absence of a Mr. John Dickinson, who was the leading opponent of independence, and it just so happens that day he was conveniently absent, shall we say. And the change in South Carolina? Well, let me say this. Number one, well, we were instructed by our constituents to vote in the majority. And secondly, we all decided individually to put aside our personal feelings and vote for unity. Yes, question.
Did the exportation of rice and indigo play a part in your decision about trying to obtain independence from England?
Oh my goodness, the exportation of rice and indigo. We can never escape business, can we not? Not at all. Well, matter of fact, that was actually an issue that was settled by my father in 1774, when an exportation was put forth to no longer export rice and indigo from the colonies. And that delegation from South Carolina, including my father, objected to this. Matter of fact, they objected so strongly, they quit Congress. A few days later, an olive branch was given to them, where indigo would no longer be shipped overseas. However, 70% of the rice would be shipped. Right? This was done because, well, unlike the northern colonies, South Carolina's economy was wrapped around these two commodities. It was something that could not be used in the colonies itself. So our fortune, our wealth, or more importantly, our future depended upon these commodities for us to be able to survive with these. And with the Declaration, if we look here, and of course there were 56 signers. When we signed the document, and by the way, only one person signed that day the document, and that was Mr. John Hancock. Perhaps that's why he has such a large signature on this document. But around August 2nd was when the majority of signers put their signature on this. They started here in the north. So we start in New England. We work our way down. We can see John Adams' signature here. And we work our way down, and as we go to the left, suddenly we run into South Carolina, next to the bottom. And there we see my brother-in-law, Edward Rutledge, also Thomas Hayward, Thomas Lynch, and of course myself, Arthur Middleton.
Now, sir, you paused for a moment at John Adams' signature. Have you some sort of relationship to tell us about?
Well, John Adams, here's what I discovered. Remember how I talked earlier that in some cases, some of us didn't care and really like one another too much? Well, John Adams was my nemesis in Congress. Matter of fact, I believe it was Adams himself, so he described me as not only being very pompous, but he also said for every Oliver I threw at him, he threw a Cromwell back. We were constantly at one another. However, I should point out, he also said that even though we may not have agreed, together, our goal was the same.
Well said, sir.
Now, after the signing of the Declaration of Independence, I remained in Congress there for roughly a year. And I must be honest with you, I despised every moment of it. Okay? One, I missed my country. And when I say my country, I am talking South Carolina. Two, I made effort upon effort to try to strengthen and receive a standing army here in South Carolina to bolster its defenses, but to no effect with that. Matter of fact, I found myself more at war with these New Englanders over who was going to have power in the Congress here and make those decisions. So after 77, I came back. Matter of fact, I was re-elected to Congress in 78, but I declined because I had had enough for the moment. And also there was something else happening. South Carolina was being threatened. As many of you may know, in 1776, in June of that year, South Carolina, well, Britain tried to invade South Carolina by sea. Did not work. In 79, they tried again. This time they tried by land. Did not work. However, in the spring of 1780, they came by land and sea, and unfortunately, it did work. Myself and my brother Thomas, we were actually in the city of Charlestown during the siege. We were part of the state militia. And despite all our attempts, we could not stay the hand of the British. And in May of that year, Charlestown fell to the British. And there, well, I was paroled. However, with that parole also came a signing of an oath of allegiance back to Great Britain. And that, my dear friends, I refused to sign. Matter of fact, because of my refusal, Cornwallis actually branded me a violent rebel. And without signing, well, in the eyes of the British, I was breaking my parole. So, in November of 1780, I was arrested. Imprisoned aboard ship here in Charlestown, and then sent to St. Augustine, Florida, where I served as a prisoner of war for nearly 8 months.
Tarring and feathering, refusing an oath of allegiance, arrest, and send to St. Augustine. You've had quite an exciting life, sir.
Did I not say that I was a committed patriot to this cause? Very much. Now, in June of that year, of 1781, I was released as part of a prisoner exchange in Philadelphia. However, there was no option for me to return. I had letters from my wife, letters from other family members telling me that if I came back to South Carolina, my every move would be watched. They would be harassed because the British did not trust an Arthur Middleton free in their territory. So I stayed in Congress. I continued my duties, and I again kept fighting for South Carolina to try to bring more troops, more supplies to support the Southern Continental Army that was here. Through some of my work, and more through my prayers, South Carolina was eventually saved. In October of 1782, I was able to return home. And what is interesting is when I did return home, well, first of all, I found that my family had grown by one. Right? When I left, I had 5 children. Suddenly, I had 6 with that. My wife was pregnant, was 9 months pregnant at the time I was taken prisoner. Also, I found that things had changed here. There was more feeling, the war had brought on a sense, not only a sense of duty, but it had also brought on a sense of compassion. In my younger days, as I mentioned earlier, I had called for the confiscation of property for anyone who supported the British cause. Now, at the end of the war, I reversed that decision. I had seen what the terrors of war can do to people. And now is not a time to be steadfast and dedicated to one idea. It was a time for compassion. It was a time for understanding. In December of 1782, I was president of the city when the British marched out. And perhaps next to my children being born, my time in England as a young man, that truly was a happy time for me. The next 2 years, well, I retired from public service because I had a duty to my family. During the Revolution, my country became first, my family second. But with the war over, that was reversed. I not only tried to take care of my family, but more importantly, I had to take care of my property, of my plantations, my economic standing there. And I spent most of those 2 years not only trying to repair the property, all the damage here done, but I also spent a good part of them trying to reclaim my property. and this property was in slaves. During my lifetime, I owned approximately 730 some enslaved people. During the Revolution, I lost nearly somewhere between 100 to 200. And
lost how, sir? What do you mean?
Lost how? Some were stolen by the British. Some ran away of their own accord. And some also succumbed to disease and just the ravages of war. But it was my duty to my family to bring back this economic base for them. So I could not only so that we could live comfortably, shall we say, but I also had to prepare a way for my future sons and daughters as well. So for 2 years, I repaired our standing here. And then, in 1785, I went back to public service. But I will tell you, my heart was not in it. I was merely there as kind of for participation, shall we say. I did not have that strong of a voice. I instead started looking at things that would bring not only my family enjoyment, but myself enjoyment. Here in St. George Parish at the time, I started a jockey club. I started a hunting club. I started looking at more works of art and trying to better the life of all those around me. And then, much to my surprise, on January 1st, 1787, I expired. Okay. For several years prior to that, I had actually been sick, possibly from the ravages of malaria, we believe what it was. And unfortunately, I was not the only family member or the only member of my circle to succumb to such a disease. So as I look back here at Middleton Place, I look back at my life of my family and my service to my country, I tell you, I stand here very proudly before you. I lived a life of service. I lived a life of duty. I lived a life that was expected of a man of my standing and my prosperity during the 18th century here. And I hope that by coming here to Middleton Place today, that I've encouraged you to learn more about the American Revolution, to learn more about the trials and tribulations that went on, to learn more about the people that helped make this land in so many different ways, whether it was through labor, or whether it was through thought, or whether it was through action. To come and learn all these, and hopefully by learning all this, we can take that lesson of history, and hopefully we can use it to make a better future for us all.
Oh, that is certainly a hope we share.
Well, I feel like my time is about done with you, unless there are any more questions or comments from the audience. I'm trying to get used to an audience not actually being in front of me.
Now would be a wonderful time for additional questions. How was Siner Hayward related to the Middletons?
How was Siner Hayward related to the Middletons? He was actually one of our cousins. Very distantly, I should say. Now, Edward, one of the other Siners, he was actually my brother-in-law. He had married my oldest sister.
Mr. Rutledge?
Mr. Edward Rutledge, yes. Matter of fact, speaking of my sisters and my brothers, an interesting fact I did not mention before. When I left South Carolina to begin my education in London at the age of 12, when I left, I had 3 siblings. When I returned, roughly 9 years later, I had 6 siblings. So, as you see, my father and my mother, they were very much into having little ones run around. Matter of fact, they actually had 12 children, but 7 of those lived to be adults.
Question.
Yes.
Was Thomas Hayward lost at sea?
Yes, he was. Matter of fact, he was one of the youngest ones to die. I believe that was Thomas Hayward. Sometimes I get Thomas Hayward and Thomas Lynch mixed up. My memory is not what it used to be, I should say.
Yes. Well, I don't see any further questions at this time. So, all that's left is to thank you very much for coming here and being with us today, sir. We really appreciate your time.
It was my pleasure. And I hope that you'll come and see us when you're able to. All are welcomed here at Middleton Place.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. This has been Arthur Middleton, folks, with Middleton Place Foundation. And we are so grateful that you have been here with us today at Middleton Place for Let's Talk Tuesday and to start learning about the American Revolution. And we've started with our very own declaration signer here, Arthur. Of course, we have lots of perspectives to share with you, so we will be revisiting the American Revolution in future weeks. But for now, we are going to stick with Arthur and his experiences. So we hope that you come on back tomorrow for On the Farm Wednesday, Thursday for Hands-on History, and Friday for History Unplugged, all different topics surrounding the American Revolution. And in the meantime, thank you so much. Thanks for watching. Thank you for being here. And thank you so much for your support. We really appreciate it. We're so grateful that we get to continue our mission of connecting people to the past and sharing history with you. So thank you so much for being here. We hope that you are staying well. We hope that you are staying safe and healthy, and that you are passing this pandemic time in useful and joyful, if possible, ways. So we thank you for your support and your participation. We look forward to seeing you again tomorrow and in future. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful Monday.